From 1990 until 2001, I lived in the New Forest in Southampton, or just on the outskirts of Southampton, and I effectively had two businesses that I ran. One part-time, which was my property development business, and my full-time job, and it was more than full-time back then, working 6-7 days a week as a mortgage stroke financial advisor. And the financial services business from 1990 till 1999 really grew and grew and grew. I was the sole owner of the company and we saw huge growth. I ended up with 25 staff, most of which were financial advisors themselves. And that business back then, there were months where I was taking home £20,000 after tax, which was rather exciting. And the property development, a lot of people say to me, how did I get into property development? How did I get started? So one day, working in an estate agent's, within my business, as I say, as a financial advisor, one of my buddies that I was working with, he was an estate agent, told me he was leaving the company and he was going to be a property developer, buying flips, which he explained to me was when you buy, effectively renovate a property and then sell it for more money. But he didn't have any money, and I did. He asked me back then for what was, well, it still is a lot of money. He asked me for £100,000. And I can remember being sat in the pantomime in Southampton, and at the break, thinking through at Christmas whether I should lend him this £100,000 or not. And I spoke to my wife, and she said no, but we talked about it and thought about it, and we both loved property. I think everyone in England loves property. And we wanted to get into flips. We wanted to learn how to do flips. And even though he didn't have any experience at the time, we kind of felt that the blind guiding the blind would be a good thing. And we were good on numbers. We were both very cautious, and so we felt that if we gave him the £100,000, but insisted to be his business partner in return, that would be a good idea. And so that's what we did. We, about a week later, lent him £100,000, set up a business with him. He was called Steve as well. I've not seen him for many years. We kind of just drifted in different ways. But back then, we were good buddies, and he was the guy running the running the property business, buying, I think initially for the first several properties that we purchased, mainly in the Southampton area, Fareham, for anyone who knows it, were small Victorian properties that needed a quick once-over, bathrooms, kitchens, the normal thing, and were quite light renovation projects, but they made good money. And once we started building up our nest egg from 100,000 to 200 to 300, it was all going swimmingly well, and we decided to move into new build. And I can remember, and this is when I really decided I should be putting more effort in the property development side, when I compared how many hours that he was working compared to me. I was working 6-7 times 7 days a week, 12-15 hours a day, managing a lot of staff, a lot of problems that come with that. And even though it was a successful business for many years, it meant, you know, it just drained me completely. Whereas I'd go into his office, and we'd have a weekly stroke monthly meeting, and he would be on the golf course, or he'd be telling me that he'd been on the golf course 3 times that week and was effectively running a very successful business, earning lots of money for me and for him, but working very part-time. And that's pretty much where the story ends in terms of the UK, because the business from 1996, 97, all the way through to 2001 on the property side became extremely profitable. And we were talking big money. And so we decided with my wife in the year 2001 to cut our profits, not our losses, and go and retire. It seems quite crazy now looking back, but at the time it was very exciting. I was 34 years old, and I just woke up one day and thought, you know what, I don't need any more money. We had lots in the bank, and if I sold my shares in the company, we could retire, and that was just amazingly exciting as an idea. We were excited about going to live back in France, where she came from, which is a place called Salonge, which is in the French Alps. And so that's what we did. We sold up everything, our shares, the business, and all the businesses, and we took our money and we went to live in the French Alps. We arrived in France in September 2001. That was me, my French wife, and my little daughter. Well, she wasn't that little, she was a little bit bigger. She was 18 months old. And I don't think I've felt such happiness or elation since, because the feeling of having financial security, living in the French Alps, which is an amazing place to live, so I ended up living here for 15 years, and just having an amazing family was just an amazing feeling, yeah. And when I go back to that period, and I really do remember it as if it was only yesterday, as well as the elation of the financial security, it was a very strange scenario, because most of the people around me obviously weren't retired, and particularly not on the French Alps. A lot of people were working or generally just visiting for a couple of weeks. And so whilst my buddies would come over from England, and I met some good friends here, it was very odd going on the golf course on your own, and sometimes I'd even go on exotic holidays on my own. And me and the wife had different views on what retirement should be, I guess, because of our age and how we felt at the time. And she got bored really easily, and so decided to go back to work. She felt a little bit odd being that young and not having much to do. And so she went back to work, and we kind of grew apart. And a few years later, you know, having enjoyed those few years of not doing very much other than having fun, we actually separated. And we're still good friends now, but anyone who's been in that position will tell you that it's a very usual thing to happen, because my wife will tell you I actually changed. The dynamic, motivated, busy guy that she met who was successful was suddenly playing 18 holes of golf a day and climbing mountains, and so I became a very different person. So we split up, and that in itself was very painful. I can remember, you know, someone I've been with for a best part of, I think it was 18 years together. That was very painful for me, painful for her, painful for my daughter. But what was interesting was the way I'd set up my affairs in France. And if anyone else ever moves to France, this is probably a good tip, is to make sure you get your affairs set up properly. I thought they were, but actually the way I'd set up my affairs legally in France meant that my ex-wife ended up with most of the assets. She realised that, you know, maybe I need some financial help, because she had all the money or most of it, and so she supported me and became an investor in my business. And I decided to start property developing in France, which was a big decision for me because it's something I'd never done before. In France, obviously. I'd had the experience in the UK, but could I take that successful experience without my English business partner, who was the one that was mainly running it, and use that experience and transfer it into France? I didn't want to leave or to stay in the area. My daughter was still young, she was only 6 or 7 at the time. And how could I do that? And that turned into an obsession. I thought, right, I'm really going to make this work. And so I started looking for property, and I agreed actually with my ex-wife to still continue working together on the first couple of projects. So the first project we found, or I found, was actually a project called the Route de Megève, which is a beautiful little townhouse in the centre of Salonge. This property was actually owned at the time by members, friends of the family, or friends of my ex-wife's family. And they were from Africa, black Africans who, after a few years of owning this property in the centre of Salonge, that they wanted to return back to Africa, basically, and would I be willing to buy the property off them? And we bought the property for an incredible 175,000 euros, which is nowadays is probably similar value in pounds. And we bought this with the goal to create 4 apartments, 4 really big apartments. We felt that was a great location, bang in the centre of town, and at 175,000 was a real snip. We would have to do the works to obviously turn those, turn what is effectively a townhouse into the apartments. But we did the budget. We were expecting to make some good money, but then we got lucky because an estate agent that we'd met and I'd started talking about maybe making this into apartments, phoned me up one day and said, look, I've got some great news. I've got 4 guys, they're buddies. They would like to buy the house without you doing anything to it. And they want to do that with an uplift on the purchase price that they'll happily pay. Let's get this figures right, 350,000. We call that a back-to-back deal. They're quite rare now and they're quite hard to do because so many people are in property. But back then, I can't remember the actual year, but that would be, probably about 2004, 2005 maybe, something around that sort of period. You could do it, because not so many people were doing back-to-back deals. So that was the first property, that worked well. And apart from paying some interest and her money back, her capital, that meant I then had enough money of my own to start again doing my own little flips. So I did a couple of other small little flips. The next one was Rue de la République, again in the centre of the town that I was living in, Salonge. And this building is probably the ugliest building that you'll see that I've done from the outside. It's very plain, and I didn't, because this was my own project. I didn't actually even get round to painting the outside, so it looks the same today as it did all those years ago. And again, we're looking at the same sort of period as the first flip. So what did I do? I basically took this property, same principle, which was basically to create 3 apartments. It had to remain commercial downstairs on the ground floor, and we sold that to a speech therapist at the time. I think it's now something completely different. But at the time, it was a speech therapist company. On the first floor and the second floor, I turned into 2 apartments. So where did we go from there? Well, the next project, I actually teamed up again with my ex-wife. And we were really excited about this because this was a project called Berzier. Now, Berzier was, I think, probably the first larger project and has got some great memories for me. Larger project in the Alps, 12 apartments, 12 luxury apartments. The views were absolutely stunning, overlooking the Mont Blanc Massif. And views out to 360-degree views of some wonderful mountain scenery. And this was a property which was actually inherited by my ex-wife, but it had fallen into disrepair. It was very derelict, and the scope on this was to do a heavy renovation. So a heavy renovation is another step up from your small flip. And meaning, by the nature of the beast, that we had to do virtually everything. So we were doing new shutters, new windows, new roof, completely new interiors. There were no electrics interior, there was no plumbing, there was no sanitation, and there was no water even within a mile of the building. So we even had to pay, I remember part of the negotiations was with the local town hall, where we had to pay 90,000 euros to the local town hall just to get the water to the building. But we did that, and it was an exciting project to work on because I decided to learn a new skill out of my comfort zone, which was to manage the project manage it, hands-on. So that was me doing the schedule of works, it was me ordering the materials and ensuring the deliveries arrived on site. It was me managing the workforce, and I absolutely loved it because it did 2 things. It forced me to improve massively my level of French because it was probably quite pidgin French before I started the project. But if you're suddenly managing people that they're relying on you to communicate effectively, I think I probably didn't do that when I started the project, but certainly by the end of it I did. And that's one of the big reasons or big ways I learned to speak French. But the other skill set was the actual project management side. You know, here I was managing a project of about 1,200 square metres, it's about whatever that is, 13,000 square foot, 12 luxury apartments, all the landscaping and all the bits that go with it. And I made a lot of mistakes. But I came in on budget, which I'm really proud about. Within 50,000 of our 550,000 budget, and that's 550,000 euros, by the way, we actually came in under budget by 50,000, and I was really pleased and thought, well, I must be the best project manager ever because I've come in on budget. And about the same time, I then came across another English person this time in Chamonix, who I really enjoyed working with, who was also looking to be a developer. And we found another project called Villa Bertholet. Notice the French accent. And this is, again, another similar-sized project to the last one. This was 14 self-contained apartments. The big difference on this one, this is, again, another central salonge project. The big difference on this one was we decided that we didn't want to do the finishings. The finishings very often the bit that can be stressful and costly, and it's the bit often you can go over on. So we wanted to do all the common areas, which is the roof, the windows, the exterior, and then the staircase. And then we would literally bring an electric cable and all the water bits, plumbing into the apartment, but we would just sell it as a carcass for each person to then decide how they wanted to finish it themselves. And it was hugely popular. It's something which in France is a popular option anyway. And we sold those as carcasses really quickly, and the building is still, again, very beautiful today. I think there's 3 commercial premises downstairs and 14 really nice apartments, very typical of the area upstairs. So that was a great scheme. Then after Bertholet, we then found another project which I nicknamed Colley. It's called Villa Gentienne. And Villa Gentienne was an old hotel. And this one was a funny one because we bought it off a French guy who was a raving alcoholic. And why do I know that? Well, when we met him at the property, he had a table set up with 2 bottles of wine and 4 glasses. Now, you might think that's quite normal because we're in France, but this was at 8:30 in the morning and 1 bottle had already been finished. And I remember that very vividly. And he basically was doing a back-to-back flip. So he'd bought this old hotel and he'd gutted it a little bit. It was empty, no furniture or anything in it, and said, look, you know, I want an extra 50,000, I think it was, that he wanted after all his fees. And so he flipped it onto us, bought it just before the world banking crisis in 2009-ish. And we started work on it. Obviously, we didn't know the world crisis was coming at that point. And we'd obviously obtained planning permission for, I think it was 10 units, it may have been 11, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 10 going back. And we did all the outs. Again, there's another heavy renovation project. So another one where we weren't doing the roof, we were changing a lot of the windows, we were building a new massive fronted conservatory on the front, and we were completely renovating from A to Z the interiors. So it was a heavy renovation project, and this one was very different as well because it was actually based in a ski resort in Saint-Gervais. That sounds exciting, and it was. The only problem when you're trying to sell in a ski resort is it tends to be very seasonal when it comes to selling. But we had a bigger problem than that because this particular project was just before the banking crisis, as I said, and when we started work and we started putting the first 1 or 2 properties on the market is when the world crisis actually hit. And we went from being very optimistic to, oh my God, what are we going to do? And anyone that was developing at that time will relate to that. We were fortunate that the banks, we didn't actually owe very much to the bank at that point. There was a lot of equity in the property, so there wasn't huge debts on it. We hadn't finished the property, that we were far from finishing it. And because of that reason, we decided the best thing to do, we couldn't give the apartments away for toffees in that period. So the best thing to do was to stop. And so we actually closed down the site, locked up, and did nothing for about 12 months. It may have been longer, I can't remember exactly, maybe it was 18 months. until the market allowed us to go back in there and finish the project off. And when we did go back in there, it was good. It must have been a good 18 months, actually, I think, before we went back in. We finished off all the works. As I say, the building itself I didn't enjoy. Loved the location, the fact it was near a ski station. Location, which is why we bought it. But as I say, you know, the actual building itself is pretty damn ugly. But the properties all ended up selling. That was great. After the crisis, again, only about 18 months later, but we had one or two that stuck that wouldn't actually sell. So on that particular project, we ended up losing a little bit. We didn't lose our shirt, but we're talking, I think from memory, it's something like about 30 or 40,000 of our joint money, which we ended up losing. So whilst not fantastic, we did a lot better than the vast majority of developers in that particular period. Then some months later, I was sat on the terrace of my local bar, Chez. Everyone in the area knows this particular bar because it's really busy, really popular, a great bar. And opposite this bar, there was a beautiful but neglected old hotel, effectively, with a bar, restaurant downstairs, but very 1950s style almost. It was a throwback in time. And sadly, because I quite like these old worldy bar, restaurant type places, because there's not many left now, but the owners had fallen ill and they'd closed. And as I was sat there wondering what was going to happen next to this amazing place, what new lease of life it would have maybe, an estate agent suddenly opened up the shutters, and I remember her putting this with her mobile number, this for sale sign. And as she was putting the for sale sign up, I thought, I've got to go and view this, because it's right opposite this amazing bar, and it wasn't particularly, well, I think noisy, a little bit noisy, but it had a good reputation. And I thought this would be an amazing place to have some offices downstairs, commercial space, and 8 apartments was effectively what we worked out we could create with the upstairs space. You couldn't really create apartments on the ground floor because it was in the town centre. And so I went to see the local mayor and ask him his opinion, and I'd looked up the local rules and regulations in the area, where it also did concur that I could do this, and so I knew I was actually right and I could go and do this. And he turned round to me and said, I'm going to refuse anything you put in, any application you put in for apartments. I'm going to turn this down unless you put a bar restaurant. But actually, no, he didn't phrase it that way. He said, not a bar restaurant. I want an English pub and restaurant on the ground floor. And I said, well, you can't say that. You can't dictate to me, because your rules and regulations say I can do what I want, really. And and this is the way it works in France, I guess, but he said, well, I don't care what they say. I'll refuse everything. You can take me to court if you want. That'll take years. If you really want your apartments, I would recommend that you do a bar restaurant, pub style, British style downstairs. So I went home that evening really angry, and we actually fell out, me and the mayor, over this, and some of his staff, because I thought that was wrong, that they could dictate what it is I built, because it wasn't in their policy. But as I got home and started talking things through with some friends, I thought, well, why not? This could be a lot of fun. So I set about with some friends and some English builders that were really quite high level in terms of their ability, talking about, you know, what we could do, and that's really when the Fizz Bar restaurant was created. And we decided, once we got the planning, and we did get the planning, we went back to the local mayor and said, OK, have it your way, we'll do a bar restaurant, and it'll be English style, because that's very popular in France. It'll be very pubby on one side, and it'll be very nice restaurant on the other. We didn't want to I didn't want to get a local architect involved, because how would a French architect possibly know about how to do an English pub? And so, well, I had to say, a number of English builders, we got together and we said, well, we could do this ourselves. We'll be the interior designers. And we went on Google and we got all these images together and we put them all in the middle, and between us, we labelled each wall, and we decided to pick out all the best bits from everyone's ideas, and it was a very dynamic way of effectively creating our own bar restaurant. with the input of the people who are going to be creating it and building it, as well as obviously my input. You know, had to sort of represent my personality too. And it took me a long time to try and find the name, and a lot of people know that I'm a very energetic, full of energy, bubbly sort of guy. It's a bit corny now when I tell you the name, but that's where the name The Fizz came from. The Fizz also is a double connotation because it's also the name of a mountain which the bar looks out onto, so it's quite a good name. And when we opened up the bar restaurant, we had our planning upstairs. We got rid of, I think, 6 out of the 8 apartments. I still own 2 of the apartments today, and whilst I have now sold the bar restaurant, it went to auction, I still actually own the walls. I actually still obtain the rent from the new owners, if you like. The last project I did was probably the most exciting of all for me in France. It was called La Crémière and was an old hotel situated, perched very nicely on the side of a mountain, overlooking the Mont Blanc Massif. And this beast of a project, which was somewhere in the region of 40,000 square feet, I think it's about 3,600 to 3,700 square meters, we converted into 26 luxury apartments. Now, we started this project with the view that it would take us 18 months to complete the build. It actually ended up taking us nearly 2 years, and there were a number of reasons for that. There were a number of issues, surprises, I guess, not good ones, bad ones, that we came across. Without going too much into the technical detail, a lot of this was where we were having to move the staircase from the end of the building more central, and the same with the lift shaft. And that caused us a lot of extra costs and a lot of extra time, about 6 months extra time. But it was a great project to work on because I had half an English building team on this project at this point, and they were amazing, really top quality guys. And I also had on a very good quality French team. And yeah, it was a great project. The end result was 26 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. Each apartment had its own private balcony, and the vast majority of the apartments, I think 23 out of the 26, actually had views of the Mont Blanc itself. So that was great fun. And it was a great project to end my time in France. It wasn't as profitable as I would have liked. The profits were forecast a lot higher, but due to some of these nasty surprises, that got really eaten away. And yeah, we overshot on our costs, but we still made a reasonable profit on the whole deal. And that's it. That was my time in France. And so, who knows? I might renovate and come back here again. I've had a fantastic learning experience working in France with both the English and the French. It's very different to working with the English in the UK. And I decided to move back to Plymouth because that's where my family is based. And I remember feeling so excited, and I still am today, to be honest, about working as an adult for the first time back in the town where I grew up. And Plymouth's an amazing place, the whole of the southwest of England, I love. So where did we start? Well, I think the first thing, and this is a great lesson for everybody, moving to a new area or starting a new business where suddenly you need to build up your network, and you need to do it quickly. So the first thing I did was to go to a load of networking meetings, start my presence on social media, and get my name out there. And it soon became evident from some of the local meetings that I was going to, that I'm sure most of you will know, the national meetings, that there was a massive lack of experience I noticed in the room. And don't get me wrong, there was some very good, very professional people. But when it came to property development, pure and simple, not many people have been doing it as long as I had. And so I soon became quite popular on the speaking circuit and started speaking at a number of different events. And they always used to be very surprising events from the point of view of the reaction I would receive, because people quite clearly in that room would want to know how to flip a property and how to do commercial conversions, and I'd only been in the business maybe for 5 minutes or for a couple of years. So I noticed very quickly that my experience was something which people were preying on. And that got me to thinking about what I should do. So the two things I decided to do quite early were to focus on building my network up, as I said, with a view to building my business up. Because although I had that experience, I feel, and I still feel this today, that I've got to hold myself accountable and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. So I started off by doing a few smaller flips, and I still like flips today, and I don't think I'll ever stop doing them, to be honest. And then I moved on to what I think is probably my first real project that I've enjoyed and of any sort of consequence, which is my current project in Dudding Court. Now, Dudding Court has been a great project for me. It's still ongoing. We're still at quite an early stage of reselling, but this project is also sentimental because my father was actually a patient in this, what is an old hospital that closed down, an old military hospital, known to the locals here as the R&H, Royal Naval Hospital. Closed about 20 years ago. A lot of it has been developed from either office space into residential, or a lot of it still continues as office space. And we are developing the old operating theatre, which I'm really excited about because it just makes you think about how many injured soldiers would have gone through this operating theatre over effectively World War I and World War II. Goals moving forward are quite simple, which is to continue developing, not to get too big, but to focus on quality rather than quantity, and do projects that I enjoy. And of course, the big thing I'm doing now is supporting people like you to get started and as a property developer, whether that be flips, whether it be small projects, or whether it be bigger stuff. So I look forward to meeting you soon, and I hope you enjoyed this documentary.